What's going on, guys? This is the Illegal Defense, episode 9. We're going to get into some college football. A lot of great games last week. Some ranked games that we wanted to kind of see how these teams matched up. So we're going to get into it right with the Ohio State and Penn State game. So,
Yeah, and so we had number two Ohio State go into Happy Valley. This was a big game for a lot of reasons. The Big Ten not as strong all around this year, so you know, to a ranked matchup in the Big Ten is kind of a big deal because of the top heaviness of that conference.
right.
This was the kind of the first big test for Ohio State. I mean, they had Iowa the prior week, but Iowa was a team that great defense, but everyone knows that their
Their
offense was
offense
not good,
struggles.
and Ohio State was going to be able to pretty much handle that without much issue unless everything went wrong for them. So yeah, this game, Ohio State and Penn State, they have a pretty nice rivalry going. Usually they play each other pretty close. And this game didn't disappoint. This was
Yeah,
a
it was a really good game.
it was a good game. It was a tight game for most of it. Both teams were able to make some big plays offensively, defensively, and really kind of trade shots till later in the game where Ohio State
Just ran away with it for the most
where they
part.
pulled away. They kind of just turned that switch on and really just clamped down defensively and offensively was just able to um, grab some big plays, especially in the run game where they were really
They were really
struggling to run the
struggling, yeah.
ball. Trevion Henderson goes with two, rushing touchdowns. But yeah, this was a game that we knew was going to be a big noon game. It was a change of pace. Usually, if Ohio State plays
Plays the
Penn
big
State,
game,
it's a
it's
night
night.
game.
Yeah.
Big noon might have saved Ohio State in this instance, especially with how the game
I
went.
mean, yeah, even regardless, they had a great environment there.
Yeah, they
So,
still had a great environment. You can only imagine the difference if it was night. It was a night game there. It's even up a few
yeah,
levels from
it's
what they did in that noontime game. But yeah, look, Ohio State struggled running the ball, but they had a big game. Still being able to throw the ball. Marvin Harrison Jr. continues to
still has a
impress.
great game.
People keep talking about him as probably he'll be one of the best. He'll be the best receiver in the game in a few years. A few years into his NFL career, that's what people are projecting at this point. He's just kind of unguardable. And then huge game for JT Tuimoloau. Coming out party for him. He's a
Yeah.
guy on. I actually have him in my fantasy college football team, and he hasn't been producing. But a guy of his pedigree, I knew to just wait. He's
Be
gonna get
patient with
his
him.
yeah,
Yeah.
he's gonna get his moment. He's still a sophomore, but he played so much, even as a true freshman that committed so late in the process.
Right.
And yeah, this game he kind of showed you a little bit of everything that he could do here. Maybe one of the best stat lines ever for a defensive player. He comes out 2 sacks, 2 interceptions.
One goes back for
Yeah,
six.
one he takes back to the house for a touchdown. Forced fumble recovery,
Yeah,
two pass
that had to be
deflections.
at least like that had to be the defensive game of the century from any defensive player,
Yeah,
NFL or college football. To do that in that environment alone.
yeah, just ridiculous, and
uh,
especially time wise, the timing of those plays. Like we saw, Super Bowl, Aaron Donald comes up with a big sack late in the game.
right.
Like the timing of these things matter almost as much as making the plays itself.
Yeah.
He was able to make some of these in crunch time to really get his team over the edge and put the game out of reach for Penn State. Because,
Right.
like we said, Ohio State came on late, but he was, that pick six was really what,
Was a pivotal
yeah,
moment,
it made
and
it,
it just
too far out of reach for that much time and
right.
really kind of put the nail in the coffin for this game. So, huge win for the Buckeyes here. Tough loss for Penn State. It's a game that they probably feel like they could have won if a few other things went their way. Still good effort from them.
Yeah.
Hard to say anything bad about that. They kind of
They
did
ran
what
the
they needed to
ball
do.
really well against Ohio State
They
too.
ran the ball. Their
So
scheme wise, they were able to, one, their secondary.
Right.
Joey Porter Jr. and the rest of those guys, they were able to really play a great game. I mean, outside of Marvin Harrison,
Right.
it was
There
hard.
wasn't.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
hard for people to get open against them, and that's an NFL secondary to go against. An NFL wide receiver room there,
Right.
and then offensively they were able to do some things schematically. We saw them kind of line up in almost like a power formation, then
Yeah.
to shift everybody out wide, and then we saw James Franklin and Sean Clifford kind of take advantage of their lineups, and he was able to run off of
Right.
that. If they gave it cushion on the outside, they were throwing slants, and they were able to find
Just
some ways
get
to.
creative.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was honestly a great game by Penn State. Disappointing for them to lose, but that's what happens when you go against a team that could really put
Put
that
the
in
pedal
another
to the
gear
metal.
like Ohio State. So but yeah, Ohio State stays undefeated, number 2 team in the country. They win 44-31, and yeah, like we said, huge game, and kind of the last big test for Ohio State until they go into until Michigan comes
Comes
to
down.
them for
Yeah.
the last game of the regular season. So definitely a measuring stick, and now they'll have a few weeks to kind of make things right and prepare really for that Michigan game against teams that they should be able to handle with no problem
Right.
in the coming weeks. Um, Another big game, a huge game in the SEC. We had number 19 Kentucky going into Tennessee, the number 3 ranked team at the time, and Kentucky just ran into a buzzsaw here.
Yeah. Kentucky just couldn't get anything going.
There was a lot of discussion about the contrast and styles because of how Kentucky kind of runs the almost the slowest pace in the country, and Tennessee's on the higher end of that spectrum. And yeah, that Tennessee offense came out at home, and they continued doing what they were doing. Hendon Hooker was lighting it up. The defense showed up to play. They were forcing Will Levis to not be able to.
To do what he's been doing
Yeah,
all year.
yeah, not
And
impose his will and do what he was able to do all year. Yeah.
yeah, and it's kind of tough when Tennessee has all this momentum and they're taking care of these SEC opponents. I mean, they took care of the big dragon in the opponent with Alabama. So they head into this game with. I mean, Kentucky's not a pushover team either. But I mean, they were able to stop Will Levis from doing what he could do. I know he was really he was kind of banged up. I know he still has that finger injury and things
Hmm.
like that, so that might call for the performance that he had. But again, Tennessee just completely just did what they had to do and continued to just play at a high level, and just interesting to see what they'll be doing next week, and we'll get into that a little later on.
Yeah, yeah. Like you said, big matchup next week, but a huge win for Tennessee here. They keep it rolling. It kind of feels, in a way, like this is their type of year. We'll see how things turn out with them. But yeah, a huge, just to keep that momentum, right? We know they got the big win at Alabama. They continue to keep winning. They pick up a huge win against a ranked SEC team here. And yeah, as we come down to the wire, they're certainly a team to watch. A lot of people, making comparisons to that LSU team that won the national championship, with just how the feel of it, the way that they're playing offense,
The environment.
the environment, putting up the points. So yeah, definitely, um, big things coming for Tennessee, and we'll see how much they could handle and how far they can go. Moving on to probably the biggest Big 12 game. This one was a bit of a letdown. We had Oklahoma State, ranked number 9 at the time, come into number 22 Kansas State. Kansas State was without their starting quarterback. Oklahoma State has been kind of proven a few people wrong all year, and earlier in this season, we kind of went over some overrated, underrated teams. I had Oklahoma State at the time. I said that despite their record, I don't think they don't deserve their ranking, but I think they will come down to earth at some point. I don't see them finishing as one of those top teams.
Right.
This game kind of
Tell it all.
finally proved that. All right, but they played very well so far, but they go into they go on the road, sure, but you go into Kansas State. Kansas State had a lot of hype coming into the season with some of the playmakers on their offense like Deuce Vaughn, etc. They don't have their starting quarterback, and they just completely dominate
Dominated. Yeah.
Oklahoma State.
I
I
mean,
mean,
the
it
line
was
of
just a
scrimmage, they dominated. There's not much that Oklahoma has to take away from this game. They had maybe 3 or 4 tackles for losses. Outside of that, they got completely dominated in the trenches. They couldn't keep up, obviously. I mean, the score tells it all. If you get shut out on the road, I mean, if you get shut out anytime, it's
yeah,
like,
you get shut out, and then your opponent puts up 48 points. It's
yeah,
like it doesn't get much worse than that. So yeah, a tough loss for Oklahoma State. I know afterwards, Mike Gundy kind of admitted that he kind of held some of his guys out during practice for the week, with concerns that he wanted to kind of keep guys healthy and that he's never done that before. So he kind of took some ownership and said that that might have been the reason why they really didn't come out and perform, because he held his starters out and they didn't practice during the week. But yeah, I mean, still that's surprising. I mean, for a team to show that level of drop off, that may have contributed, but
yeah, that's
I mean,
just
they could have, all their starters could have been coming off an injury. They should have been able to put forth a better game than that. So
right.
but it is what it is. We know these college kids, week to week. It's sometimes you could
Very,
be completely different as a team in your performance.
right.
And Oklahoma State is still in a strong position to kind of still compete in the Big 12 here. Definitely a letdown game, but I'm sure they'll get back on track and continue trying to evolve and make sure this type of performance doesn't happen again this year.
Right.
We can talk about the reveal of the first college football playoff rankings. A bit of surprise here to some. I am somewhat surprised, but not too surprised. But
Right.
yeah, so number one, Tennessee got the nod there. They're ranked number one for the college football playoff committee, followed by number two is Ohio State. Not much of a surprise there. Georgia number three, and then you have Clemson at number four, with Michigan looking on the outside at number five, right? And so this is like we talked about Tennessee earlier. Seems like it's kind of their year almost in the way they're playing, and you could say that for Ohio State as well. You can even kind of say that for Georgia. You could say that for a few teams.
No.
It seemed like when the year started, there was a kind of a top
It was kind
three
of just
ish,
like,
right, with Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia. Right
right.
now, it seems like they've kind of came back to earth a little bit, with teams like Michigan rising up. Clemson is still there. They're kind of in the conversation just because we don't know yet. Are they a pretender? Are they really for real?
Yeah,
We
we
don't
don't
know.
really have an idea.
Alabama picked up the loss. They're kind of hanging around. They're showing vulnerability. They're not the same type of Bama team we're used to. But in a year like this, they're still in it. And then you have an Alabama's in there at 6, and then TCU at 7 with that undefeated record, making noise as well. But yeah, I mean, look, Tennessee gets the nod here. These rankings, while they're important, I guess, to see how these guys are being ranked in terms of the playoffs, they don't mean a whole lot yet, because we're still so far away and a lot of games that are yet to be played, especially within a lot of these top contenders. We know, and we'll preview that game in a few, that Tennessee is
Tennessee,
going
Georgia
to
game.
Georgia. That's going to be a huge game for SEC and for college football playoff ramifications. We know later in the year, Ohio State is going to finish with Michigan coming in to their house, and a few of these other games. SEC championship. Probably one of those SEC East teams is going to play Bama. So Bama's going to have a chance. Big 12, there's still a whole lot of stuff going on over there with TCU undefeated. Will Clemson make it out unscathed of the regular season? So a lot of things going on there. But yeah, definitely some interesting things so far with how they
Yeah,
rank the teams in their initial rankings.
I think there's a lot. I mean, there's still a lot of football to be played. There'll be more of a telling factor once we see. I mean, once we see this Georgia Tennessee matchup, I think that's going to tell a lot about Tennessee. We've seen how they matched up against Alabama. Obviously, Georgia's a great team. They put up a lot of points. They have a great defense. So it'd be good to see Hendon Hooker go against that defense, see how he performs. Um, I think Tennessee's legit, but I think this will be the stamp like, okay, they're actually legit. It's kind of just like you said with the whole LSU situation, where maybe it's just Tennessee's year. We've seen that with LSU. We've seen that with Auburn when they had Cam Newton. So all these SEC teams, they tend to get their chance. I mean, Alabama obviously is really the bully in that entire conference, but there's times where we see big teams step up, and I'm sure we'll see more with what's going to be going on with Tennessee and Georgia. Um, Also Ohio State. I mean, they're playing lights out. Their offense is nonstop, just scoring, and they're able to keep up with every team that they've been playing with. So again, we'll see in the playoffs, and we'll see how that all pans out.
Yeah, and then we could jump into just, I guess, some discussion about how the entirety of the playoff models are going to work out. Right? We know this is been a big discussion about expanding the playoffs, getting more teams in. They want to expand it from four. We know it used to be just the one national championship game. Now it's gone to four, and they're looking at options. There's been back and forth about, well, will it be 6? Will it be 8? Will it be 12? Kind of, there's different reasons and different people's reasoning for wanting different formats in this case.
Right.
How do you see this in terms of playoff models? When you look at the different options between, we know they're not going to stay at 4, but between 6, 8, and 12, what do you see as potentially a model that you think might work?
Well, potentially, I think I think a 6 team model would work well because it doesn't diminish the factor of the regular season. We spoke about it last week and how important the regular season is, and there's no other sport like college football and how much these regular games matter. So I think if you bring it down to like 8 teams, 12 teams, 8 is kind of like pushing it to where it's still important but not as significant. 12, it's just like, all right, anybody could come in, and it's going to be more so based off of who's a favorite or who's this or who's that. So I think 6 teams keeps it honest. Maybe the first 2 teams get a bye, and the other 4 teams they battle it out, and then they go into the matchup with the next 2 teams that have the bye, which I think would be good because then if you look at it, it kind of keeps the significance of the regular season and the regular games because it's like, okay, we want a first round bye the same way that the NFL does it.
Mm.
So I mean I think that would be ideal, but again, we don't know what would you
Yeah,
really.
so it seems like, oddly enough, or not even oddly enough, it seems like the money is telling the people making these decisions to go 12, which I don't
Right.
really like. And it's like you said, everybody kind of gets in at that point. Well, not literally everybody, but too many people.
Right.
And so the thought process there is it's better because more teams get in, more teams have a shot. But realistically, we see that they don't really have a shot, right? So I don't think we're gonna solve the problem of kids sitting out bowl games, for example, with expanding to 12. Because if you're, on a team like Cincinnati, and say Cincinnati has a decent season and they come in as a 9 seed, I
Right.
mean, what is that going to do? You're going to run into, a top tier like SEC team,
Like an
get
Alabama
destroyed
team
just
and
like how they got destroyed against Bama in
right.
last year's regular playoff. So the 12 is hard for me. Um, I do like, look, so we know they're expanding. So if we know they're expanding, I personally would be fine with keeping that 4. I agree with you about the 6. 6 kind of keeps the regular season and in a way almost gives that little incentive for teams to get that bye being ranked in the top 2. That makes, being in the top 2 even more important than it's ever been.
Right.
Um, but still keep the regular season important and still mean that Yeah, there's a little room to slip in terms of being perfect and or not, but for the most part, unless you're really like a top tier program and you're displaying it, you're not really gonna be able to get into the playoff. Now, will this mean that okay, Alabama would under Nick Saban with 2 losses? Yeah, they're almost probably getting in every year. But I don't have an issue with that. They've shown their dominance. If they're
Yeah.
there in a 16 playoff format, then I think they've probably earned their right to be there. And I think in a way, other teams should have the opportunity to play them and say, yeah, we just beat Bama. You know what I mean? So
Right.
in a way, it works all around. 8 is kind of the weird in between where I guess better than 12, but I think it severely diminishes the regular season, just the 2 more teams, because now it gets very tough. You might see 3 loss SEC teams get in
Get
an
in.
18 playoff, and so now you look, as a fan of a team of like an Ohio State or a Georgia, a Clemson, a Alabama, you're almost guaranteed a spot with 8 teams going in. I mean, you have to
Yeah.
really screw
Really
up
mess
your
up your
season
season for
to,
that to
to not
happen.
get in, and I think that is a little too far. For me personally to think it's gonna work good, but
Yeah, I think you made a good point with even with the 12 team.
mhm.
So it's kind of like if I mean we've seen it. College basketball is a lot different from college football, being that it's a lot less personnel, completely different sport. But I think also what the committee is most likely trying to look at is like, oh, maybe we have a Cinderella story, or maybe, and it's
Yeah.
like in football, the measuring stick from the Bamas and the Tennessees and Georgias to even just like UCLA or a Oregon, it's like we saw what Georgia did to Oregon.
Mhm.
So you're gonna tell me that's gonna be something to watch in the playoffs? It's
Yeah,
like,
especially with non-power five teams that are
yeah,
gonna be getting in. And it's like, look, we get it. We see the upsets, right? We saw App State this year. We know the huge App State win at Michigan before.
right,
We see other huge upsets happen in college football, but they're really one-offs, right? They're usually very close games. The better team plays a terrible game. The worst team plays one of their better
their best
games,
games, yeah,
and then they get the win. Can we see an upset if they expand to 12? Yeah,
possibly,
chances obviously are going to be there because they're going to have the opportunity. But for the most part, you're going to have teams get destroyed. And then also the problem is, okay, you get one upset, but you still have the whole rest of the way to go.
right,
You're not going to win the whole thing
the whole
as a
thing,
as an 11 seed here. You know what I
and
mean? And,
yeah,
and and as you talked about different sports, right? College basketball is the regular season almost doesn't matter because of the hype of the
exactly,
NCAA tournament. So you could do whatever as long as you get in. Then you could go and get to the Final Four as a 8 seed, and it doesn't matter, right? So
right,
you don't need to be perfect. You could just kind of figure it out. And as a result, I mean, there's not many regular season college basketball games that have much hype around them to
begin with,
yeah,
I,
non-hardcore college basketball fans.
right,
And as me, as somebody who, watches a bunch of sports, will I watch some of those games? Yeah. But it's a very different feeling than, what we got with say Tennessee, Alabama a few weeks ago. What we're going to get this coming week with
with
Tennessee,
Tennessee and
Georgia,
Georgia,
right? You
yeah.
can't replicate these things. And if you mess with the formula here too much, you're gonna kind of ruin it. So yeah, hopefully they'll stick to 6, but I think they're
Yeah,
probably the money's probably gonna
leaning
force them to
towards
be
12.
greedy, and they don't really care if they get more money type of thing. So um, yeah, we'll
I,
see how
I
that
mean,
goes.
one last thing to even touch on a little bit is other bowl games. It's like sometimes we get to see great matchups with like, say, I mean, we had Utah and Ohio State
Right in the
last
Rose
year.
Bowl, right?
So it's like if you're say it is a 12 team playoff and the 12 team is going against one of the top tier teams, it's like you're robbing viewers of a great game to
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
see. You can
yeah.
have like a 12 and to an 11 go match up together, and that'll be a lot more competitive evenly. So it's like, you rob. There's a lot of factors, but that's yet to be determined, and we'll see what happens with that.
Right. So we'll talk about this big upcoming game this week with Tennessee going into Georgia. Um, Huge matchup here. Like we talked about, big implications for the playoff, for the SEC in general, and huge test. I mean, Tennessee passed the Alabama test already, but they were at home. They had the crowd behind them, and they win by a field goal in a close game. This is a bit different where they're going to Georgia. We know Georgia's had their struggles sometimes. We saw them struggle with Missouri when they weren't playing as well earlier this season. But this is, they're going to be up for this game. They're going to be ready. Kirby Smart's going to have his guys ready to go. And Tennessee's going to really have to prove some things here with, can their offense keep this kind of pace up and be able to put the points up against Georgia? And can their defense as well hold against Georgia, right?
Right.
The odd thing and some stats that people were mentioning so far this week is if you did a blind resume test in terms of who throws the ball more with the passing yards and who is getting more rushing yards, you would think Georgia has more rushing yards, Tennessee throwing the ball more type of thing, but it's really flipped.
Hmm.
And it's a like even one of the reasons why Tennessee was able to beat Bama was because they were able to run the
Run the
ball
ball
so
so well.
effectively,
Yeah.
so that they could kind of bring those safeties down, have them get in the box, and then they could hit you over the top for the touchdown. So it'll be interesting how Kirby Smart obviously has the advantage of being able to watch Bama have this problem. I'm sure he has a plan in place to attack this.
Right.
On As well as they have some guys over there. We know they have pretty much a whole NFL team that left last season, but they still have guys that are solid players. A lot of
Yeah.
guys who are going to the NFL as well, and yeah, it'll be some interesting things to see how Kirby Smart attacks Tennessee on the defensive end. And we haven't even mentioned much about Stetson Bennett and his up
Right.
and downs. What is Stetson Bennett going to do? Because now, if you look on the other hand, if Tennessee has a subpar game offensively, maybe Georgia does their part defensively, but maybe Tennessee is able to still come out with a
So
win if they're
yeah.
off, right? Because Tennessee's should be able to put up points almost no matter what with their offensive pace and all that. Like, I would be very, very surprised if Tennessee got like held to 6 points, like how they held Kentucky to 6 points
Yeah.
this past week. So, yeah, it'd definitely be an interesting thing to see how this one turns out. Georgia at home, 8.5 point favorites here. And yeah, I mean, I think Georgia has a pretty good chance to win this game. Um, I'd probably root for Tennessee just to kind of keep seeing the
Seeing
party
it.
rolling with them.
Yeah.
As a team that's been down, I don't know how keep having this success. Things change and things like that, and then maybe becomes annoying dealing with Tennessee fans again. But
Yeah.
for now, I think it's a fun story, and yeah,
Yeah, it would be nice to. I think that's a great point with Stenson Bennett is like we don't know what Stenson Bennett we're gonna get, and it's like he obviously has to come to play. Tennessee is no pushover, no rollover team. They're gonna put up points, so you have to be able to go head to head with Hendon Hooker and that offense that they have behind them. And like you said, I think Kirby would probably be able to game plan a little bit better, being that he did get to see what Alabama struggled with. But again, I don't know. I think Tennessee just they have so much momentum going into this week. They have so much momentum going into this game this year. Their fans, I'm sure, are gonna travel. They're gonna be there, present, being doing what they were doing in the Alabama game. Um, but it's not an easy opponent, but I think Tennessee comes away with it, and I think they'll cover the spread for sure. But I think Tennessee's gonna come out with the win on top.
yeah, and we can get into another huge SEC matchup. This one is number 6 Alabama traveling to Death Valley to face number 15 LSU. Alabama 12.5 points favorite here. Um, Pretty decent sized spread. Alabama has been known to kind of dominate some of these type of games on the road, these kind of bounce back, let me show you what we have type of games. They haven't really been playing like that this year. This is one, though, it kind of feels like all the makings of too good to be true in terms of this is a game where Saban will kind of re-exert
So
and take over that role that he's had against an LSU team. Yeah, LSU's ranked number 15. Um, are they actually the 15th best team in the country? I don't know. I don't know if I would say so.
yeah, I
I
don't
think
think
I don't
so.
think they're not deserving of the ranking resume wise. We've seen them had play great. They've played some great games.
Right.
And maybe they're able to kind of, harness some of that magic that they've been able to use against certain teams. But with a 12 and a half point spread, it almost feels like Alabama might, come out,
Just
dominate, and
put the
cover
foot
that
on the
no
gas
problem.
and yeah,
Yeah, they
exactly.
might just choke these guys out. I mean, it's a night game in Death Valley, and we talked about environments when we talked about Ohio State going to Penn State. We talked about environments with
With
at
Florida.
Tennessee. We talked about Florida early in the year. We got Tennessee going into Georgia this week, but Death Valley is one of the harder places to play. This is a night game, right? Everything sets up pretty nicely for LSU, but sometimes players play, and Alabama, despite some of their struggles, still plays like a top tier team. They have a loss to Tennessee, who's
It's a
ranked number
great
one
team.
for the college football playoff right now. They're doing things right. Their offense is insane, and it was a 3-point loss on the road. So now you come in. Let's for argument's sake just say LSU is the number 15th team in the country. I mean, Bama still should probably be able
To put them away.
to put them away, and it speaks volumes them coming in on a road game, a night game, in an environment like LSU has, and still being 12 and a half point favorites here.
Yeah, that's great.
So, yeah, I probably look to Bama to kind of self correct itself here a little bit. Really get back on track with one of those statement games. They need it. They're obviously going to still be in the hunt for the playoff, and yeah, I look for Bama to win and cover here. And we'll move on to our last game we're previewing. This is a Big 12 matchup between Texas Tech and number 7 TCU. Still undefeated TCU, 9.5 point favorites at home against a pretty scrappy Texas Tech team, but that a team that is kind of up and down. We saw them be able to pull some upsets at home at points. We saw them also struggle against Baylor last week and kind of not perform up to par there. There was a few games that we could have previewed. This game seemed to make the most sense despite Texas Tech not being ranked.
Right.
Really just because of TCU being undefeated and their hunt for the college football playoff. And they're still, I mean, 9.5 points is a decent amount, but it isn't that much, right? But TCU is a team that everyone has their eye on. Can they stay undefeated? They've been able to win games by, they put up a lot of points. It is the Big 12. We talked about the exciting football going on in that conference, but they also had some close games. They've been able to win games also by just, I don't know what you want to call it, luck or whatever, but just straight knocking teams, quarterbacks out of the games.
Yeah, which is crazy.
So yeah, it'll be an interesting one. We know Texas Tech, they can get on a roll and put up points. So if things go right for them, they can have the firepower to match TCU. TCU should have the better defense. I mean, they've kind of proven that, but we see teams, things happen, and other teams are able to score points sometimes. So, interesting matchup. I would think TCU would win. As far as the spread goes, I'd probably put it as 50-50. It's probably about right there in terms of, yeah, will they cover or not. So, yeah, big matchup for the Big 12, really because TCU is at this point the best shot for the Big 12 to have a playoff team. We talked about the college football playoff rankings now, the first initial ones, and
Right.
TCU is down there at number 7. So they need, we know the other teams ahead of them, they're going to face each other. how far are those teams going to drop when they lose is one part of it. And two, TCU needs to keep on pace and keep winning. If TCU loses, especially if they lose in a bad way,
Yeah, to a Texas Tech team that
it'll
kind of
probably
diminishes
be
everything.
they'll probably be out, and maybe probably no Big 12 team can make it. So as the only hope, definitely a big game for the Big 12 as a whole, and TCU definitely hoping and doing their best to make the playoffs. We'll go over some best bets for the week. We have a bunch of ranked teams here in our best bets this week. We'll start off with number 5, Clemson -3.5 at Notre Dame. Notre Dame's actually been playing pretty well as of late. They've been beating teams. They have that terrible loss at Marshall,
That was
or not at Marshall. Marshall actually came into their building and won that game. But they have that terrible loss to Marshall. If it wasn't for that, they'd probably be ranked somewhere, towards the end, but still ranked somewhere. I think Clemson though is just going to be able to pull this one out. Their defense has been great for most of the year. We've seen some lapses here and there, but for the most part, they're pretty stable
yeah,
in
they're pretty
terms of
consistent.
in terms of putting together a good effort. Even if the first half doesn't go the way they wanted to, they're able to self-correct and really clamp down in the second half. I think for a Clemson team that look, they still have the pedigree of being Clemson, Dabo Sweeney, that aura, that swagger. They're going to be able to walk into Notre Dame and do what's needed. They know, similar to how we talked about, TCU team that needs to be undefeated to make the playoff. I think a year like this, where Clemson hasn't really done anything spectacular, and all those good teams towards the top right now, kind of in that cluster,
Yeah,
there isn't really any room for error, I don't think, for Clemson as it stands now. Like, we see college football, crazy things happen. I wouldn't say there's no chance for them to get in if they have a loss, but they would need other things to go their way, other teams to kind of eat each other alive to, for them to be back in the mix. So
yeah,
I think they know the severity of this. This is a game they should win, right? They are a better team than Notre Dame. It's on the road, which is a bit of a trap kind of thing, but I like Clemson's chances. I think that was going to have the guys ready to go. I think the defense is going to show up. And I think DJ is going to play a decent game. I mean, we talked about DJ kind of not living up to hype. We talked about that a ton, but he's had plenty of games where he still puts up great
yeah.
numbers.
He does put up good numbers,
And
and
and I think DJ is going to be able to do that against a Notre Dame team that, honestly, too, you know, it's not a very good matchup for Notre Dame because they are offensively challenged. And for a team like Clemson, they might be able to just roll in there and just put their foot on their throat early, clamp down, and be able to give up not many points. Hold them to 10 points or less, and kind of cruise to victory here. So I do like Clemson there. With a 3.5 point spread, I think they'll be able to cover that.
for sure.
We have Liberty ranked number 23 right now. Liberty picking up some big wins, and they're rolling into Arkansas, who is unranked at the moment. Arkansas is, they've been up and down, right? Not very consistent. Some games they put together an amazing effort and they win pretty well. Other times they struggle. We saw them struggle, even against lesser competition at times, and really have to rally back late. So, Liberty is a explosive offensively as well. So I like Liberty to cover this 13.5 point spread. Arkansas should ultimately win, right? But for 13.5 points against a team that runs the ball, very run dominant offense that Arkansas has, we know they struggle a little bit in the secondary. Liberty is able to air it out on you. I like Liberty to cover that 13.5 point spread. I think Auburn will kind of help them with that by running the ball a lot and kind of, limiting some possessions here and there. I definitely like that as one of my best bets. We talked about Tennessee and Georgia. I have Tennessee and that 8.5 point spread at Georgia. I think Tennessee is going to come to play. This could be a game that's like an instant classic, kind of a close
Close
game,
matchup.
whether it be high scoring or low scoring. I think these teams are pretty well matched, and yeah, I think that's too many points to give a Tennessee team that's on the road. I mean, Tennessee, I wouldn't be surprised personally if Tennessee won outright.
Right.
So to give me 8 points here, I like.
That's
I
a
think
good one.
I think
Yeah.
they'll be able to score the ball, even on Georgia's defense. So I like Tennessee to keep some things close. We have Kentucky at Missouri. Kentucky, threw up a dud last week against Tennessee. We saw Missouri kind of take Georgia down to the wire a bit earlier this year, but I think Kentucky's a much better team.
Yeah, I think they'll wake up,
Yeah,
and
I
Will
think
Levis will have a lot better performance than he did last week. So
yeah, exactly. So I like Kentucky there, and then we have South Carolina at Vanderbilt. South Carolina 7.5 point favorites at Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt has been not as bad as usual this year, but still for a South Carolina team that played very well recently. They did pick up a loss last week, but their star running back Marshawn Lloyd got knocked out of the game. He should be back for this game. I like South Carolina to roll here and cover that spread against Vanderbilt. And yeah, so that'll do it for this week's college football coverage. We'll get back to you next week, have some more best bets, recap some games, do some more previews, and so on and so forth. So see you guys next week.